Howdy everyone. So, why are films like Fight Club and Taxi Driver so commonly misunderstood?
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
You talking to me?
You have to consider that God does not like you. In all probability, he hates you.
Listen, you screwheads. Here's a man who would not take it anymore. A man who stood up against the scum.
You met me at a very strange time in my life.
Like, no. Really. Here's something that I'm sure a couple of you folks have seen online before. Fan cams, edits, or memes of popular movies that happen to be about toxic male characters and usually romanticize the qualities that they exist as a critique of. It's a weird thing that I've noticed for a number of characters over the years besides Travis Bickle and Tyler Durden. In fact, it also applies to any of the male leads from the following movies on this title crawl. You know, like just to name a few of them. I like to call the films that have become the subject of this type of content red flag movies. They're flicks that were supposed to serve as a warning about or commentary on hypermasculinity or some facet pertaining to it that's since been idolized or adored in a way that contradicts that intended reading. It's not that there's something wrong with the movies themselves or that we shouldn't watch, enjoy, and celebrate them, but rather that a lot of people, namely men given the subject matter, have developed something of a malformed relationship with them. One that crosses the threshold of just being a silly meme or edit and enters the territory of celebrating or relating to the problematic characteristics that their protagonists embody. To clarify, it's when one of these movies have a well-defined thesis that's since been turned into a misrepresented soundbite, and in the process has been given the reputation of being something of a red flag whenever it's brought up in everyday conversation. So today, I thought I'd pick two of my favorite red flag movies to see what they have in common, as well as try and figure out what I can glean from them that makes them such commonly misinterpreted works. And by the way, if you happen to have another red flag movie or even a TV show that you'd want to share with me in the comments, feel free to, because that list I shared was far from comprehensive. Additionally, if you want to check out more of the stuff I've done and you like podcasts, feel free to check out my two shows, Media Obscura and Glaring Admissions. They're on a shared RSS feed you can find a link to in the description, and you can also watch their latest episodes here on this channel. Okay, so let's establish a simple baseline to work off of for this analysis. Taxi Driver was Martin Scorsese's fifth film and stars Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle, a lonely, alienated insomniac who's a cabbie in New York City. He's a self-righteous veteran, and the movie slots in surprisingly well with other 1970s vigilante and crime films such as Death Wish. Over the course of the film, we learn about Travis's view of the world and how he thinks of the streets as something akin to an open sewer. We also see the character struggle to acclimate to everyday life. He spends his time going into porno theaters and isn't portrayed as being especially sociable. He meets a woman named Betsy and takes a liking to her, but also stalks her for a bit before asking her out. And when he does ask her out, he blows a shot with her by taking her to a nudie film.
I don't know why I came in here. I don't like these movies.
Well, I mean, I didn't know that you'd feel that way about this movie. I don't know much about movies, but if I
Is the only kind of movies you go to?
As the film progresses, we get the sense that he lives a life devoid of meaning. He's only getting by, aimlessly dragging himself from day to day until he decides to take charge of his life. Travis gets in shape. He builds a small stockpile of weapons and practices using them. Because nobody is close enough to him to recognize the red flags, he becomes radicalized by his pursuit of meaning and goes as far as to kill a person robbing a convenience store. He also plans to assassinate the presidential candidate that Betsy was volunteering for, and when that fails, goes on a one-man crusade to kill a pimp and his associates in order to rescue a preteen girl from a life of sex work. It's a portrait of paranoia in America, as well as a glimpse at how people may have felt a decade and a half into a steady climb of crime within the nation. Taxi Driver came out in February 1976, about 5 months before the first Son of Sam killings happened and about 3 years before the Guardian Angels were founded. In short, crime was a problem, people were scared, and Taxi Driver feels like it was designed with the public's fears in mind. However, it was never intended to appeal to those fears. The movie is teeming with a criticism of vigilantism and depicts Travis Bickle as a person that's mentally unwell and on a crash course for self-destruction. Outside of the scenes showing him dedicated to violence, he's portrayed as an uncharismatic, miserable person to be around. He's definitely a sympathetic character, which we'll get into later, but many of his actions are also hard to agree with, if not just outright contradicts the way the character sees himself.
He's a prophet and a pusher. Partly truth, partly fiction. Walking contradiction.
You saying that about me?
Well, who else would I be talking about?
And on the other side of the aisle, we have David Fincher's Fight Club. That film stars Edward Norton as an unnamed narrator that I'll just refer to as Jack for the sake of clarity. Like Travis, Jack is an unwell insomniac that's stuck living a meaningless, mind-numbing life. Only instead of taking a job as a cabbie and dispensing sweet street justice, he ends up creating an alter ego / imaginary friend named Tyler Durden and something called Fight Club. Despite not being aware of what he's doing for most of the film, Jack ends up turning Fight Club into a multi-city spanning anarchist fascist outfit and ultimately commits domestic terrorism in an attempt to induce chaos on the streets. Just like with Taxi Driver, it explores themes of toxic masculinity, its own twisted form of vigilantism, and mental illness. And similarly to Travis Bickle, a lot of Jack / Tyler Durden's talking points and beliefs are laced with contradictions. As for how people have gotten these movies wrong over the years, it mostly comes down to failing to acknowledge the muddy ethics of what these characters do. A whole culture has sprung up around these movies that depict their protagonists as traditional male role models. Members of this culture paint Travis Bickle out to be a cowboy vigilante that's looking out for society's best interests, or Tyler Durden as the protector of all things masculine. They don't address stuff like Tyler Durden being an unrealistic, imaginary construct of an unstable insomniac, or Travis Bickle's irrational, erratic behavior. As far as these viewers are concerned, the movies start and stop with the formation of Fight Club and Travis playing martyr. Their only takeaway from them is that men need to push back against some perceived sense of castration in their lives, and that the only way they can do that is through blood sport or whatever. So why do people get these movies wrong? I'm sure someone out there has already said or typed this in the comments, so I want to get it out of the way from now, but it isn't because they're dumb and immature. I'm nowhere near arrogant enough to think I could provide a definite answer to this question, but I can confidently say that it isn't that. Now, they might be, but calling someone dumb on the internet is, in itself, both dumb and immature. Plus, providing such an easy answer to that question hardly would have constituted me doing an entire video on the subject. Instead, I think it'd be more interesting to use the question as an excuse to explore how these movies are presented, because I think the answer lies in how audience members process what they're shown. You see, Fight Club and Taxi Driver prey off of our familiarity with and expectation for happy endings. I know these aren't the kind of movies where people will necessarily expect one, but hear me out. It often feels like the majority of mainstream Hollywood films end with a happy ending, and if there was ever a storytelling trope for us to have some innate craving for, it's probably that one. I mean, it's literally a running gag at this point for movies to always end on a positive note. It's boilerplate storytelling, and we tend to assume that a movie will end with one, especially when we're personally invested in its characters. But Taxi Driver and Fight Club don't exactly have them. They have endings that are emotionally fulfilling and can be read as being happy for our characters, but those endings also basically fall apart once you start paying serious attention to them. Additionally, both movies spend large swaths of their runtime priming us for a happy ending, showing our leads improving themselves and growing into seemingly better, more actualized versions of the people they want to be. It leaves us begging to watch them get what they deserve. So when they finally do get it, we're left feeling satisfied and maybe even a little happy for them. Both movies do a great job of working the audience over like this, but it's also possible that they could have done a bit too good a job of it too, since it creates a very clear disconnect between the characters and their beliefs. Jack and Travis inhabit the default space of being our protagonists, so we have a natural inclination to view them as good people, especially since they're the characters we've been trained to sympathize with. Additionally, we're ultimately following their stories, so anything that comes in opposition to them and their beliefs are automatically presented as antagonal. But that's the problem. These characters are only the protagonists of their story. For everyone else, they're the bad guy. Just because we feel bad for both of these characters and can almost certainly relate to something they feel, whether it's Jack's ennui towards hyperconsumerism or Travis's feelings on Iris being a child sex worker, doesn't mean their actions are justified. If we genuinely care about these characters, we should be willing to point out their shortcomings and want what would actually be best for them, and not just what makes for a better movie. And to be clear, I'm talking about emotionally. Like, we should absolutely want for what makes for the better movie, since we are in fact watching a movie. But we should also be willing to have a nuanced conversation about these characters too. To speak plainly, we should do a better job of acknowledging that Bickle is still a murderer and that Jack is a pseudo-messianic cult leader turned terrorist. These are not negotiable. Both movies end on images that come just a hair short of explicitly stating as much. Though it's implied that Travis may have gotten the girl by the time the credits roll, and that everyone views him as some sort of hero for saving Iris, the film ends on a shot that implies that he's far from finished lashing out. And seeing as we've followed this character for 2 hours and know just how insane in the membrane he is, we know it's only a matter of time before he snaps again. The movie's screenwriter Paul Schrader even admits to this in one of the film's commentary tracks.
Marty had asked me what happens at the end, and I said, well, he's not fixed. It's going to all happen again. This is not a happy ending. This is just the end of one go around the track.
As for Fight Club, that movie ends on a shot of Jack and Marla holding hands as Project Mayhem blows up multiple credit card headquarters. Where Is My Mind by the Pixies is playing, and there's a vaguely romantic, shitness to the scene, but it never shies away from showing just how utterly fucked Jack is for doing this. He even tells Marla that she met him at a very strange time in his life, which almost reads as him taking full responsibility for his actions and no longer hiding behind the Tyler Durden persona. The two movies end the way they do because they're movies. They have to end somewhere, and both of these points provide the neatest, most emotionally cathartic ending to their stories. By ending their stories ambiguously, Scorsese and Fincher are allowing us to have our cake and eat it too. They're giving us some of that dopamine that makes our brains fizz like Pop Rocks from watching our mentally ill protagonist technically be a hero who gets the girl, while also reminding us that they're victims of everything from a failed mental health care system to toxic masculinity and sexual frustration. But if that's the case, and they never fully shied away from making the bittersweet nature of these endings apparent in the first place, I can only really restate my question. Why do people misread these movies? Well, on some level, I think it comes down to wish fulfillment. Remember all that stuff I opened this section with about happy endings? Well, both directors had to put in the work to make us expect such a thing. They had to make sure that we understood why Jack was feeling so detached from reality, as well as why Travis has so much contempt for the world. We needed to watch them meet someone and try to relate to the world so that we could feel bad for them when it fails and get why they turn to violence. And last, we needed to see the system itself fail them so that we could feel an inkling of the disappointment and anger that they constantly live with. That one thing being a major point too, especially in the case of Fight Club.
You need to lighten up.
Can you please just give me something?
Without these elements, we'll have a harder time relating to these characters. And if we can't relate to them, we won't care whether or not they get a happy ending. But a potential consequence of this is that both films have created characters that a lot of us see parts of ourselves in. We may not be homicidal taxi drivers, or D stands for Delulu recall coordinators for car manufacturers, but there's a good chance that we can relate to these characters and their struggles. We've all had a job we've hated at some point, become numb to some potential ethical concern at that job, been exposed to the apparent worst humanity has to offer us there, and we've all done this while feeling powerless and unable to enact any meaningful change in our situation. If their jobs themselves aren't relatable, the dreamlike state of teetering on non-existence that these guys are trapped in might be. And especially if we're still in a situation that's relatable to the one these characters find themselves in, there's a good chance we want to see them get better, stick it to the man, or become the hero of their story. Because the movie starts with Travis only being a maladjusted, kinda out there guy, we want to see him and Betsy connect. Likewise, when Jack is bouncing around support groups and meets Marla, we might want to read the moment as being a pseudo meet cute. Not just because these are familiar beats to us as movie watchers, but because we already care about the characters on some level since, like I said earlier, they're the protagonist. This is hardly a mind-blowing idea, but it needs to be stated anyway. People tend to seek out media that affirms their worldviews. In most cases, people want to like things. It's definitely easier to hate things, and the internet seems hell-bent on extorting that for every last drop of engagement it can from you, but we're generally hardwired to seek out positive, pleasurable experiences. Because we're pleasure monkeys like that. So it's somewhat understandable for us to want to fixate on the more positive qualities of these characters and their endings, especially since Bickle and Durden do raise their fair share of good points. Travis isn't wrong to suggest that politicians go about handling crime and urban blight in the wrong way, nor is he wrong to suggest that it's bad for runaways who would otherwise be graduating middle school or starting high school to be sex workers. Similarly, Tyler Durden is right to suggest that we have an over-reliance on material possessions, and that there might be something vaguely masturbatory about self-improvement. These beliefs aren't wrong on a surface level, and I'd wager that the majority of people watching these movies agree with them across the board.
You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. You're not your fucking khakis.
So of course we relate to these characters that have something we see a part of ourselves in. It's a no-brainer that we do, and it's the same reason that so many people fall for grifts, cults, and things of that nature. There's an inkling of truth to what they're saying. This is gonna feel a bit tangential, but just bear with me. I recently read the book Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood, and the Prison of Belief, and one of the opening sections of that book featured a quote by Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, that really stood out to me and felt vaguely on topic for this. It goes, "What is true for you. No one has any right to force data on you and command you to believe it or else. If it is not true for you, it isn't true." And that's the exact way to describe how some people approach these characters. Believe and resonate with the stuff you want to, and just disregard everything else. And if anyone tries to flag something about what you believe into you, or try to point you in a different direction, they're out of line. But the obvious problem with that is that ignoring things you don't like also leads to overlooking that these guys are full of shit, both literally and metaphorically. Except for Tyler Durden, because he's imaginary. You basically get jack shit there and, well, Jack left town.
We have just lost cabin pressure.
I already pointed out that both characters are a pair of walking contradictions, but it stands to reason that I should explain why they are. In the case of Travis Bickle, his contradictions are fairly obvious. He's a lonely, isolated man who chooses to spend his nights driving taxis, a decision that almost definitely doesn't lead itself to that much healthy socialization. Additionally, he's clearly sexually repressed and something of a manipulator from the way he talks Betsy into going out with him.
I think you're a lonely person. I drive by this place a lot, and I see you here. I see a lot of people around you, and I see all these phones and all this stuff on your desk. That means nothing. And then when I came inside and I met you, I saw in your eyes and I saw the way you carried yourself that you're not a happy person. And I think you need something. And if you want to call it a friend, you can call it a friend.
But also views himself as a savior in the making and the only person who can help Iris, which he didn't do multiple times in the movie, by the way. He literally could have helped her any of the multiple times he saw her before shooting the brothel up by waving a cop over or something. And it's obvious why he didn't do it. It's because he doesn't actually care about Iris. The character is only invested in the glory of having a purpose. He wants to be the vigilante who did a good deed, even if the means he takes to accomplish said deed weren't the safest or most ethical ones available to him. Here's an example to illustrate my point. There's a scene where he drives Martin Scorsese to an apartment in what is actually the guy's second cameo in the movie. While parked outside, he listens to him talk about how he intends to shoot his wife and her lover with a .44 Magnum.
But you know who lives there? Huh? A lives there. They're like that. And I'm gonna kill him. Listen, there's nothing else. I'm gonna kill him.
It's a tense, uncomfortable sequence due to how manic Scorsese is in it, and Travis's response to him is an appropriately quiet, restrained disgust. But like, isn't what he does at the end of the movie on a similar level of immorality? Like, both child prostitution and infidelity are both obviously bad things, but was the only solution to these problems really bursting through a door guns blazing? I'm not saying that both Marty and Travis should have turned the other cheek on what was going on, but surely there was something hypocritical to the way he was so clearly appalled with the guy, but also willing to do something on a similar tier of behavior. And how about Jack? That guy's a bigger hypocrite than Travis Bickle is. Despite all of his posturing against consumerism through Tyler, he's still undeniably obsessed with the material world. It's just that he flipped from racking up as many worldly possessions as possible to destroying and desecrating them. His behavior is akin to a guy who just got broken up with, swears he's totally over his ex, but still commits an unhealthy amount of time and energy towards thinking about them. Plus, there's Tyler himself. For all the shit Jack and Tyler have to say about the fashion industry or going to the gym, Tyler Durden still looks an awful lot like late 90s Brad Pitt. The man was the guy in Hollywood at the time, and he's constantly shown in expensive clothes or looking absolutely shredded on screen. He's a character who refuses to practice what he preaches, spouting lines about how we shouldn't try to improve ourselves, but also threatens convenience store clerks to get their shit together and go back to school.
Fuck off with your sofa units and string green stripe patterns. I say never be complete. I say stop being perfect. I say let's evolve. Let the chips fall where they may.
I know where you live. If you're not on your way to becoming a veterinarian in 6 weeks, you will be dead.
The more sense you try to make of Tyler Durden's philosophy, his complete one without any omissions, mind you, the more you remember that these are just the borderline nonsensical ramblings of a drunk guy with serious mental health issues. Both Jack and Travis are characters in desperate need of guidance. Their lives are of little meaning to them, and they've treated that issue by creating a new meaning through behavior that escalates into violence. They also have lost their identities in the process, with Tyler Durden calling most of the shots for Jack and Travis shaving his head into a mohawk, which was not only a symbol donned by the punk scene he definitely would have hated, but was also worn by soldiers fighting overseas in Vietnam. Both moves highlight the characters washing their hands of their humanity, with Jack spending most of the movie blissfully unaware of his actions, and Travis drawing a line in the sand between the person he was before and after he decided to take action. These new personas are a means for these guys to justify what they're doing. It's also why Jack gets to play the hero when he realizes what he's done, and Travis is seemingly back to normal by the end of the film. It's almost like a form of plausible deniability. Like they're saying, oh, that wasn't really me that killed those people or committed a wee bit of domestic terrorism. That was a different version of me. The many contradictions these characters exhibit are there to muddy the waters. They're deliberate choices to remind you that Jack and Travis don't have the answers. That your ability to relate to them doesn't necessarily mean you should look up to them or emulate their behavior. In the previous chapter, I said that the movie never explicitly tells you that these characters aren't role models, and it's because these contradictions were supposed to help you get to that conclusion on your own. Okay, so we know that people tend to misinterpret Taxi Driver and Fight Club, and that it might have something to do with the way the films frame their characters. We also know that these characters are relatable on some level, and that they speak to a sense of unrest that a lot of people have experience with. So what do these characters and their respective stories say about society itself? Taxi Driver and Fight Club are touchstone depictions of modern male loneliness, a specific slice of a larger problem that's only gotten worse over the past few years. A 2023 report by the US Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS for short, found that prior to 2019, half of the adults in the United States reported measurable feelings of loneliness, which can, among other things, increase your risk of dementia by 50%, increase your chances of becoming diabetic, and generally weaken your immune system. The answer that they provide to loneliness is about what you'd expect it to be, with them saying that the best thing you can do to combat it is seek connection and find community. Two things that, you guessed it, appear in both films in some capacity and also let our characters down. While it's true that Travis's attempts to be social only went as far as courting Betsy and attending screenings in an adult movie theater, the guy still tried to find human connection. One could even argue that his becoming a cabbie was a move designed to put him in situations where he could talk to people. And much to his credit, he does try to talk to Wizard about the way he's been feeling, only to get brushed off by the guy.
I got some bad ideas in my head, I just...
Oh, look at it this way, you know, a man takes a job, you know? And that job, I mean, like that, you know, that becomes what he is.
In fact, it's telling that he only really became a loner and his mental health went from bad to worse after that blew up in his face. As for Jack, he was never shown as having any friends or close personal connections prior to the beginning of Fight Club, but he did quickly establish several communities for himself by attending support groups that he technically didn't belong in. However, he also didn't belong in any of them, and as such, could only really connect with and relate to the people in those groups on an abstract level. Either way, this fell apart for him after Marla emerged, which also lines up closely with the time period that Tyler fully appeared in his life. Prior to that, the guy only cropped up in brief flashes, ironically at times when Jack was struggling to connect with other people or feeling some sense of rejection. That said, Jack does eventually find a community in the movie, just one that's inherently toxic and doesn't solve his problems so much as they amplify them. And the same could be said about Travis, who does find a community of sorts by the end of the story by becoming a hero, something that we can safely assume will only aggravate the traits that brought them to him in the first place. While there's no denying the importance of having friends or feeling like you're part of a group of like-minded individuals, there's still something to be said about good old-fashioned mental health care, especially if you're Travis or Jack where loneliness isn't your only problem. Part of what makes both of these guys such an interesting insight into, among other things, the toxic masculinity pipeline is the fact that they exhibit highly pessimistic worldviews. Worldviews that are reinforced by the environments they exist within and are only made worse once they start to lose their grip on reality. On some level, it shouldn't come as that much of a shock that these characters were struggling the way that they were. Travis was a night cabbie in 70s New York, which led to him getting exposed to some truly fucked up situations. And Jack made a living protecting a major car manufacturer's wallet, skirting ethical responsibility and living under the constant knowledge that his bosses didn't care that they were selling giant metal death traps to people. It was only a matter of time before their presence in these environments led to... And what are the two things that could have gotten these characters back into a better headspace? If you guessed buying legal firearms and learning how to make explosives in the house they've claimed squatters' rights in, I'm sorry, but you're woefully incorrect and might need to be on a watch list. The answers I was looking for were therapy and psychiatric help. It's the two things these characters never pursue, and that a surprising number of red flag movies in general steer clear of. We get some looks into a version of the American mental health care system in movies like Joker, but these systems almost always fail our main character if they even get featured in the first place. After all, these movies tend to be cautionary tales about what happens when these characters don't get help. If you actually throw meaningful help at Travis or Jack, you wouldn't exactly be holding a mirror up to America, now would ya? Besides, as iconic representatives of toxic male culture, the chances of these characters getting help were always slim to none. Outside of Jack trying to get medication to help with his sleep, the protagonists of these stories, and a lot of male-centric films in general, seem to subscribe to the woefully shallow idea that therapy is weak. After all, Travis is a man who seeks strength through physical means, molding his body into a weapon as opposed to trying to sharpen his mind. He doesn't exhibit a capacity for love in a traditional sense, but rather equates it with sex based off his date with Betsy. And Jack similarly only sees doctors as a means to an end, a person to go to for pills to help you sleep or for stitches after you've been injured. Rather than try to heal the obvious wounds left behind by his father that abandoned him, he seeks release from violence or by piggybacking off of other people's suffering. The fact that he goes to support groups for illnesses tells you everything you need to know about the guy. He's incapable of feeling his own emotions and needs a pretense to express them under. He's convinced that nobody would listen to him if they didn't think he was dying.
Why do you do it?
I don't know. When people think you're dying, man, they really, really listen to you instead of just
waiting for their turn to speak.
Except that there are tons of people who would listen to him. In fact, there's an entire profession's worth of people who would love for nothing more than to hear what he has to say and offer him the odd insight on how he's feeling and what he can do about those feelings. You know, therapists. He's so close to realizing he needs therapy too. Like, you get the sense that he comes right to the edge of making that conclusion for himself, but never does it. And the same is true about Travis too, thanks to stuff like his conversation with Wizard, as well as his background of having served in Vietnam. You get the sense that he's dealing with some serious shit and that he knows he can't quite deal with it alone. It's just that he never reaches the finish line and instead takes a sharp turn in another direction. Which feels in line with something I've noticed in reality. One thing I've observed in the comments of posts about red flag movies, as well as in the posts themselves, is how self-indulgent things can feel. I don't say this as a means of punching down on anyone, but I've often gotten the sense that people were relishing in their feelings of alienation or anger at the world, romanticizing something about the emotions they're feeling as if it makes it easier to live with them. Kinda like that example I shared earlier about a guy who just got broken up with. Much like Bickle and Jack, these guys were coming at the material with a sense of entitlement. Like feeling the way they did suddenly made them better or more human than others. And this was especially apparent in one post I saw that compared a number of red flag protagonists to the myth of Sisyphus. Oh, and for transparency's sake, it's worth mentioning that the post was actually made by a woman. However, I don't think that makes much of a difference though, as the subjects shown in it are comprised of nothing but male red flag protagonists, and the content of the post itself is the complete embodiment of a specific brand of film edit on social media. If anything, that detail might even speak to how far the misappropriation and romanticization of these characters has gotten. As of June 13th, 2024, that video has something like 36,000 likes on Instagram. But I think the pairing of these characters against that quote kind of misconstrues its sentiment. If you're unfamiliar with the myth of Sisyphus, here's a clip from the Parker Posey vehicle Party Girl that does a pretty good job of summing it up.
Do you know the story of Sisyphus?
Who?
Sisyphus. It's a myth about this guy who had to roll and push this incredibly huge rock up this very steep mountain. Every time he got to the top of the mountain, the rock would roll down again, and he would watch this, and he'd walk back down the mountain, and he'd do it all over again, forever.
Drag.
It's a metaphor for life, Leo. It's famous.
As for the quote in question, that comes from the Albert Camus essay that's about the myth. And a quick, admittedly somewhat dirty idea of what it's trying to say is that one can find meaning in their lives through perspective. You can either believe that Sisyphus is doomed to roll the boulder up a hill for all eternity, or you can believe that he's found some means to feel purpose from it. That he's either allowed the struggle of pushing the boulder to become meaningful as a means of rebelling against his fate, or that he's learned to enjoy the little things it affords him, like the break he gets whenever he has to follow it back down the hill. Basically, you create meaning from a meaningless life when you embrace the very thing that's pushing down on you. And in the context of red flag movies, it seems to mean that some people are choosing to read these characters as being somewhat admirable for, as the Beatles might have put it, carrying that weight. Now, on some level, I do think they're right to liken these guys to Sisyphus. Travis's story does have a full circle nature to it that's similar to constantly needing to roll a boulder up a hill, and Jack does seemingly accept the absurdity of what has happened to his life. But here's the thing. The logic behind that sentiment is also flawed because these characters aren't entirely aware of what they're doing in the moment. And it's also important to note that they exist within a prison of their own design. One that was definitely bolstered and enabled by issues within society, yeah, but one that they're ultimately complicit in staying in. If you think about it, Travis and Jack aren't really in some Sisyphean situation because they can always get help. There's always some potential for them to get de-radicalized and for concoctions like Tyler to get taken care of. While it's true that whether or not Sisyphus would even get punished if he stopped pushing the boulder varies depending on the version of the myth you read, Travis and Jack don't have to worry about that. Outside of Jack needing to find a medical professional that isn't a part of Project Mayhem, the only thing keeping them locked down the way they are in their movies is their inability to even consider the idea to get help to begin with. As for Jack's issue, while it's true that the book Fight Club does end with him waking up under the care of several Project Mayhem orderlies, we can also infer that he will get actual help at the same time, because if we're suddenly considering the book fair game, we'll need to consider its sequels fair game too. Either way, my point is that while Travis's vigilantism and Fight Club are reasons for these characters to stay alive, are they really the only reasons available to them? Shouldn't they at least try a few rounds of therapy just to see if they'll get any better ones? Plus, and this is pretty quick and straightforward I think, these characters exhibit suicide-adjacent behavior and, well, Camus is decidedly anti-suicide. Like, it's a complete non-starter. That's a major point of the myth of Sisyphus. Not to mention, asking these characters to simply embrace the absurdity of their existence is dangerous. Other than the fact that you'd be openly supporting their violent behavior, you'd also be waving away the fact that both characters are mentally ill, and you'd be encouraging them to skip out on getting help. By reading the characters this way, it almost feels like some viewers may be trying to suggest that their own lives have meaning too. That by highlighting the ways they can relate to them and their struggles, they're carrying the burdens of their own struggles in the process. But while that could be cathartic on some level, it's risking the same mistake that calling Jack and Travis Sisyphean does. It's overlooking the fact that your boulder may not be a boulder at all. Camus' essay calls for acts of rebellion against the absurdity of life, but refusing to get help with something that, by all accounts, can get helped is hardly that. It's just self-inflicted torture. And it's not like therapy and psychiatry are perfect either, because they both obviously have their flaws. But the presence of issues in a system that still largely does what it's designed to do isn't an excuse to ignore them outright. And thinking as much is just like doomer shit. Furthermore, I feel the need to clarify something really quick because I've been talking about mental health and I don't want anyone to misconstrue my point. I'm not trying to shame anyone for having reservations about seeking therapy. That is not your fault, and in my opinion at least, has more to do with the way mental health care has been stigmatized in the modern world than any individual person's preference. Just as it doesn't make you weak to seek help, being afraid of seeking it also doesn't make you weak. Nor am I calling you weak if you misinterpreted these movies, or subscribed to a misinterpretation of them. You probably didn't realize you were, and yeah, I mean I relate. We've all had egg written on our face about something before. Not to mention, leaving any community can prove to be extremely difficult. Whether it's a healthy or unhealthy one, people crave familiarity on some level, so breaking bonds with any person you know is gonna be tough. This is even shown in Fight Club and Taxi Driver, through Jack being unable to shake off the members of Project Mayhem and Travis finding himself right back where he started at the end of the movie. At the end of the day, neither of these characters asked for what happened to them, and they even tried to do the right thing by reaching out for help at different points of their stories. It's just that it didn't work out for them, and that their very existence within a fictional work called for them to spiral. But that doesn't need to be true for the people who relate to them. Those people can always heed the warning that these films were intended to be, even if it means having to be a bit of a stick in the mud about content these characters are featured in, or having to reconsider some of the relationships in their lives. Which brings me to the last question I wanted to explore today. What can be done about red flag movies and the people who misinterpret them? Dude, I honestly don't know. I spent a couple of days trying to think of a satisfying answer to this question, but yeah, like, shit if I know. The truth is that art will always get misinterpreted by people because even when the creators of something had a clear message they wanted to share while they were making it, people are always going to imbue it with their own meaning. Take the time John Hinckley Jr. tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan because he reportedly saw Taxi Driver 15 times, or the way that Mark David Chapman successfully killed John Lennon because of his takeaway from Catcher in the Rye. Neither works ever told them to do those things. They arrived at those conclusions due to a malformed relationship they had with the art itself. There's a good chance that a lot of people will disagree with some of the readings I've made into these movies today, or even my take on Camus' take of the myth of Sisyphus, and there isn't really anything that can be done about it. I mean, yeah, we can argue and discuss the differences we have in opinion over in the comments, but when the hell has that actually ever changed anyone's mind? The best we can really hope for in cases like these is that people with different opinions are open-minded enough to at least, hear us out and consider that their readings of stuff like Taxi Driver and Fight Club might be flawed or misinformed. Not that ours are necessarily bulletproof, but that we raised a few points that are worth deliberating over in their own time. I set out to make this video because I saw a pattern online that both confused and intrigued me. I took the fact that Taxi Driver and Fight Club were commentaries on the prison of traditional male gender roles and values for granted, and I was surprised to see that the qualities that were getting critiqued by these movies were being placed on a pedestal by the very audience it was trying to warn. When I set out to make this video, I considered doing a deeper dive into the communities that idolize Travis Bickle or Tyler Durden. The ones that are made up of people who live with similar feelings of isolation, frustration at the world, and hopelessness. I wanted to use these films as a jumping off point to talk about doomerism, the black pill community, and how people become radicalized and stay radicalized because they don't want to lose the communities they've found. There was something about those subjects that reminded me of cults in a lot of ways, hence my earlier allusion to going clear, and I thought that Fight Club and Taxi Driver would have been a great way of segueing into a discussion of them. But I ultimately decided against that, because honestly, it just seemed like way too much work. The truth is that there are already a ton of video essays about those subjects out there, and a lot of them go into greater detail than I would have been able to in my video. Instead, I figured sticking to these films themselves would make for a more unique upload since it hasn't been discussed as much, and that maybe, just maybe, such a video could serve as a decent off-ramp for people who are more interested in learning about those things on their own time. Because if these red flag movies could be seen as an introduction to those communities, perhaps a deconstruction of them could serve as the beginnings of a conclusion. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and that if you did, you decide to leave a like on it, maybe share it with a friend or two that you think might also get a good laugh out of it. It's not really funny, right? That's weird. Send it to some people you think will be into this shit. I don't know, dude. And that you also consider subscribing. Additionally, feel free to check out my two podcasts, Media Obscura and Glaring Admissions. They're available on the same RSS feed, and you have over 100 episodes to choose from. You could also watch full video versions of the episodes right here on this channel, complete with 3 cameras and cutaways. Last but not least, if you enjoy reading, I actually wrote a romantic comedy coming-of-age book last year that's available on Kindle Unlimited. It's called Guppy Falls, and it follows the last summer between a set of characters that are just about to start college. It's kind of like American Graffiti meets Dazed and Confused meets a bit of early 2000s Judd Apatow and Reality Bites. Like I said, it's on Kindle Unlimited, so if you're subscribed to that, you can literally read it for free right now. And I'm also working on a print run that I'm hoping to have out by maybe Labor Day this year. So yeah. Bye.
Soap. Sorry. I make and I sell soap. The yardstick of civilization.
And this is how I met
Tyler Durden. Did you know if you mix equal parts of gasoline and frozen orange juice concentrate, you can make napalm? No, I did not know that. Is that true? That's right.